What's happening, guys? We're back. We're gonna build tools today. All right, we are back. We got some time in the shop. While we were away, I did build kind of a version 2 of that brake reservoir that we were building. This one that we were building last week. Did it a little different. I actually made it in 2 pieces, so I still got to weld these together. But that allowed me to weld in that divider and keep the weld full section. Like, we're not going to go in and dress it at all, which should hold the fluid better. So I could show you guys that whole process, but it's kind of beating a dead horse, and I don't want to do that on camera. So I'm going to do that in my own time, and once we get to the point that it holds fluid and everything, then I'll show it to you guys. Today we're going to move on to something completely different. I actually bought a big sheet of aluminum there. I've had that sitting up at Trigger actually since before Christmas, but I went and picked it up. That's what we're going to use to skin the whole exterior of the car. It's about 60 thou thick, so we should be able to get the car skinned and not weigh very much. But there's a couple panels that we actually have to bend. So there we go. So this panel here has to bend around this bar and kind of gets a little kink in it. So we also have to do a bend here, but we'll talk about that one later. So we got to bend the panels for the front there like this. So I actually did this as a test piece. So it's got a little kink in it. To bend this though, I just like clamped it to the bench and leaned on it. So the bend is not very straight. I don't know if you guys are gonna be able to see that. It's not very straight and it's not very crisp. So I hate it. So instead, we're gonna take today and build ourselves a sheet metal brake. Just kind of one of the basic kind of lift up from the bottom, clamp on the top things. Colin Furze did one, and I watched that where he actually inlaid it into his bench top. So he got to use his bench as kind of an outfeed table for it. And I really like the design, so we're gonna build something very similar to that. So that's gonna be the focus of this episode, building a sheet metal brake, and then maybe bending those panels. We'll see how far we get. So the plan is we're gonna inlay a big fat chunk of steel into our bench top here, weld a couple hinges on, and then build the swinging part. To do this, the key here is thickness. So we need big, thick chunks of steel. Luckily, my rich buddy Scott moved into a new house, and there was a bunch of this 3/8 thick by, I think it's 4 wide, flat bar laying around. And he's got so much money he didn't care about it, so I took it. He gave it to me, so we're gonna use that for our basic construction. So we'll clean it up because it's all rusty, as is everything that I have here. We'll clean it up and we'll cut a section, and then we'll router a notch into our table or our bench that it'll sit into, and do some bracing and whatnot, and then build the swinging part and the clamping part and whatnot. So let's clean up some of this steel, measure it out, and get to work. All right, and there is the before and after. So we went over it with a wire brush, an orbital sander, Scotch-Brite, a whole bunch of different passes. I turned you guys off for most of it because anytime you're dealing with sanding off rust, you get all this rust in the air, all this dust, and then it collects on the the lens and damages my lenses. So we got one of these all cleaned up. It's about 7 feet long. So it's gonna do the 2 main parts. So we're gonna have to make a fairly big break. Our length is gonna be dictated by this bend, which I think is, stand by. So it's about 33 inches. So I'm thinking we'll make a 36-inch break. 36 inches in between the hinges. So it'll be 2 plates with a hinge in them that'll then fold. And then in between the hinges we'll do 36 inches. So those 2 plates have to be about 40 inches long. So I think I can get 2 of them out of this. Yeah, so I can get 2 of them out of this piece. So we'll cut those 2 and then we can lay them out on the bench and cut our slot for them. All right, we got our kind of area here marked out for the 2 plates to sit. Now we need to make a hellacious mess and cut this down that, you know, whatever the 3/8 thickness of those plates, that it'll sit flush with the bench top. So I got a 3/4 inch straight cut bit in the router, and we're just, we set up kind of a fence around the outside there, and we're just gonna hog it all out. So I'm gonna fire up the vacuum though, because this is gonna make an absolute disaster in my shop. And I'm gonna cover the air filter on the car. So, but let's get after it. You got a little something on you there. You got a lot on you. Holy cow. All right, well that absolutely sucked. I also, yes, I should have been wearing a mask. I realized that about halfway through. Whoops. But yeah, so we made an absolute mess of the shop. We got MDF dust basically everywhere. Like just, but it is all cut, it's all flat. I'll have to do a little bit of sanding just to pull some of the router marks out where I wasn't perfectly, I wasn't perfectly square. But that's all cut. I think I'm gonna turn you guys off and clean, cause that NBF dust gets everywhere. So I'm gonna take a little bit of time to clean, and then we'll come back and put those plates in. So I'll see you guys probably tomorrow. And we're back. We got a couple more. And we're back. I got basically the whole day to work in the shop today, so hopefully we should be able to get this thing at least close to buttoned up. So we got the plates inset into the bench. Next step is we gotta make them hinge together. So, you know, 16-year-old self probably would have just stuck a bolt on there with some washers and welded them on. But I've grown wiser in my old age. So I actually went to my, my metal stockpile over there, and I found these two pieces of pipe that are like a slip fit. So I think that's like I think it's 1/2 inch OD and a 1/2 inch ID. So we're gonna use this to build our hinge. We are gonna try to build a fairly stout hinge because it has to take a fair amount of force because this is so wide. If you look at the hinges on like the ones you can buy, the sheet metal brakes that you can buy, they're made out of like 1 inch thick, big, beefy stock. So it does take quite a bit of force. So we're gonna try to build it out of kind of the best I got here. So my thoughts are we'll put 3 collars on each side. So I gotta cut 3 pieces out of this for each side, 6 pieces. We'll true them up on the lathe, put a little chamfer on them so we don't bind anywhere, and then try to weld all 6 of them on in a straight line, which could get interesting. So let's cut these up, give it a whirl. All right, we got all 6 of our collars here made, and then we cut a notch out of both of our plates, the stationary and the moving plate, for these to kind of recess into, because we do want them to be kind of halfway. I want our pivot point to be maybe a 1/16 or an 1/8 of an inch up from the surface of that, so we have to recess these in. Unfortunately, these are 1 inch OD, so when you recess them halfway in, 1/2 inch, we only got 3/8 of an inch plate, so I had to cut some pockets into the bench top as well with a chisel, but now we're good. So these all kind of recess down. I might have to do a little bit of fine tuning in a bit, but we have a next step. So the next hardest thing that we're gonna have to do here is I need to get all 3 of these welded on in a line, and all 3 of the other side ones, I don't know where they are, they're somewhere, lined up as well. So they all gotta be on one axis, because if they're tilted like this, when you go to swing it up, it'll try to bend our plates. I don't know what they're called, anvils, platens, I don't know, whatever. They all gotta be on one axis. So my original thought was I was gonna take the piece of 3/4 inch OD pipe that we're making our pivot pins out of, and leave it as one long piece, and use that for our kind of our alignment axis. Unfortunately, it wasn't long enough, so I did find a chunk of 3/4 inch round bar aluminum that is just long enough. It'll be real tight, but what we'll do is we'll put both of these, or all 3 of these on one end, all 3 of the other ones on the other end, and then we obviously can't set this right on our plates because we're recessing it and the plates would hit this round bar. So what we'll do is we'll get all these lined up on our round bar here, and then we'll tack weld them onto a piece of angle iron that's actually going to turn into our top clamp. Tack them on there in the right orientation, and then we'll be able to slide our round bar out, and these will all stay where they need to be, and then we can set our angle iron onto our plates, whatever we want to call these, and tack the collars onto the plates, and then cut them off of the angle iron. So a little bit of a convoluted way to get these mounted correctly, but let's cross our fingers and hope it works. All right, the camera battery went dead, and I just didn't feel like going in and changing the battery. So I got some work done without you guys to catch you up. I think before the battery went dead, I was just starting to drill some mount holes on our kind of main plate. Got those done, put some countersinks in them so that the wood screws that are gonna hold this whole thing to my bench will sit below the surface. And then I also drilled 2 big honking holes in the plate that are gonna accept these. These are just a 1/2 inch coupling nut, I think they're called. So they're just threaded all the way through. These are like a really cheap way to get a threaded insert. And I put a little shoulder on them there on the lathe, so they'll actually insert into those big holes I drilled. We'll weld those on, they'll sit below the surface, and then we can bolt down our top hold down plate. Next steps. I need to take a little bit more off of this coupling nut because it's a little bit of a tight fit, and then we'll push these into our main plate, weld those on, and then we gotta do some strengthening on the underside of the actual bending plate so it doesn't, you know, warp as it's going up, and build our hold down. So we got this big chunk of angle iron. I already put a notch in it there to clear the hinges, and then there's the hole that we'll use to bolt this thing down to the bench top. I have some collars that are gonna fit into there. So we got a bunch of welding to do. So let's get after it. And we're back. I skipped a whole bunch of parts because, well, quite frankly, it's just way slower if I have to move a camera around. So I turned you guys off and hustled down some progress and got the metal brake all finished. We did run into a couple issues. There was a little bit too much binding in the hinges. So I cut one of the rings off each side. So it makes it quite a bit better. Now we just have like a 2-ring hinge. We're probably gonna upgrade that at some point, maybe do something else, because there is still a bit of binding in it. You can hear it and it doesn't drop down, but it works for right now. So we did that. We also welded a piece of flat bar onto our stationary plate in order to screw sideways into the bench. Just screwing down wasn't going to work. There's not enough holding force in those screws. It also adds a bit more rigidity to that plate to keep it nice and straight. We built the top piece, like the clamping piece here. I don't have any fancy like T-handles or anything because I'm not going to use it very often. So I just run in 1/2-inch bolts. So piece of angle iron with a couple collars on it. I screwed up the placement on that one. I had to cut it and re-weld it. But that's our top clamp down piece. If we need to, we can add like an A-frame onto the top of this. But so far this has worked pretty good. And when you take this off, you got a nice smooth work surface. So that's an advantage. We also need to figure out a handle system for this moving piece. Right now I just use a crescent wrench on the bottom plate there to move it around. But a nice handle would be good, but it has to be removable because I have toolboxes under here that I don't want to interfere with. So it'd have to be some sort of removable handle. This also isn't going to be getting used all the time, so I don't want to inconvenience myself with something else in order to make this work. So it's all done. I did a couple test bends. So that one right there, all the way along there. I also bent the bottom. So these are all done with that brake. And then this panel fit on the front of the car. So that's 16th aluminum. I have some 1/8-inch aluminum we're gonna try today, and some 1/8-inch flat bar. I don't think this one's gonna be an issue just because it's such a small bend, but it'll be interesting to see how it works. So let's bend these up, see what we get. All right, that turned out pretty dang good, I would say. It didn't even struggle with the flat bar. I mean, that's a pretty short bend, 3/4 of an inch. But it made a fairly nice crisp edge, and I can definitely see where I would use that rather than putting it in the vise and just beating on it with a hammer if I ever had to make little L brackets or whatever. The aluminum was a little bit tougher, it took a little bit more oomph, but bent it nice and straight. There is a bit of a radius, so it's not making those really crisp square bends. But I mean, on 1/8 inch aluminum, you don't really want a real crisp bend because you'll end up tearing the aluminum. So that's just because my clamp down piece doesn't have a sharp edge. It actually has a rounded edge, which I'm okay with. And also because there's a little bit of movement in everything. It's not the best bender in the world, but it works. I also did do a test piece yesterday. I didn't film it, but I got started working on, this is the side panel for the engine bay. So I did this bend here with the new brake, and you can see pretty nice and crisp, nice and straight. Yeah, looks good. I do have to do a bit of work on how I'm measuring things and marking them up, because you can see, well, I don't even know if you guys can see, but the line that I drew for where I wanted the bend is a little bit off. So I just have to figure out kind of where those lines line up on the brake itself in order to get the bends in the right spot, just kind of how the metal moves. So, yeah, so that's it. I got a sheet metal brake now. I can start building the panels for the engine bay and start skinning the whole car. I probably won't because I got a whole bunch of other goodies that I want to deal with first, but it's one thing off the list. There are a few improvements that I need to make, but it'll work for right now. So that's all I got for you this week, you guys. Thank you so much for watching. If you haven't already, hit the like and subscribe. Go check us out on Instagram, Left Foot First Media, and we'll see you next week or 2 or 3, whenever. I'll see you next video. I'm out of here.